thank everyone for their patience. We had a 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock meeting and straight on to a 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock meeting. So I did think it was useful to get it. Well, I certainly needed to refill my teacup if nobody else needed to. So thank you for that. And I say apologies to everyone for the slightly delayed start. So our first item, and welcome to the October meeting of the West Shadow Executive. We have 5 months until go live from Sunday. Although the good news is in 2 months' time, Christmas will be out of the way. So apologies for absence.
No apologies received, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. And notifications to request the meeting?
None from members of the public, one from Councillor Peter Rawlinson on item 7.
Okay, thank you. Any members' declarations of interest? Don't see any. Thank you. The minutes of the last meeting have been circulated and they're on pages 5 to 12 of the pack. So can I ask, is there anything on page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12? So is it your wish then that we approve these as a correct and true record of the meeting? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I have no announcements to say other than the apology for late start. Paul, Programme Director's update.
Thank you, Chair. And
Thank you.
Paul is going to share the slides with the Executive. Thanks, Paul. So just remind the Executive that this is the programme status as at the 30th of September. So things have moved on since then, and I'll try to fill those in via a verbal update as I go through the slides, and as we go into the reporting cycle for October, which starts next week. So no significant changes in the greens and amber status. Just in terms of children's, I just bring to your attention that everything is on track to go live with the Children's Trust on Monday. All the papers have been submitted to DFE on time, and obviously we're not taking anything for granted, but we're assuming go live will take place for the Children's Trust this coming Monday. There are a number of things in the children's arena around the impacts of COVID still on the delivery of savings, so that's why it's remaining amber at the moment. Adults, really pleased to say that, and also conscious that Anna sat next to me as well, but adults went live on the 19th with their new operating model, and we just really pleased that everything went well. As ever, there's 1 or 2 snags that the programme team with the services are working through, but nothing significant, and overall it went really well. This means that there's new general contact emails specifically for the West now set up, and it does signify real transformation as well. New operating model, strengths-based approach, which I'm sure the Executive have heard lots about, and obviously it's that 3 conversation model where we're looking for community-based solutions and helping people maintain their independence as long as possible, and some really positive stories coming out of there. We also got some really good feedback from the trade unions as well in terms of just generally all the things that we said that we would do and that the management team would do were done. And I think, it's fair to say that the staff felt well supported through that process, because they have gone through some significant change, many of them moving locations and so on. So really pleased to report that. I'm hoping that we'll be able to start reporting green on adults next month, but we are now seriously into the latter stages of preparing to go live with Eclipse in December, which is the new social care record system. So that's the next big milestone for adults there. In terms of corporate, that's remaining on the Amber Watch, just in terms of making sure we've got all the right resources in place as we start to consult with the workforce and all those things that come out of that, and the preparations around the tiers 1 to 3 approach and consultation and all that. So at the moment, that's remaining amber, but we are predicting that will go green in the next reporting period. Thanks, Paul. If you could just move on to the next slide, please. Just a few things to point out here. So we're making sure now that the programme is able to split safely into a north and west implementation, but making sure that we can hold the reins tightly on those things that need to be held and coordinated and managed centrally. So we've been very carefully working through how we do that, and we'll be bringing those proposals into place for the next month in November. So there'll be some changes to the governance in the individual programmes, some rearrangements to the JIE and what sits either side of the JIE, which is really about Anna's management team, and that management team and Anna becoming more intrinsically involved in making sure that the new organisation is ready to go live on the 1st of April. So those changes are in progress, and we'll start to see that happening and being implemented in the next reporting cycle from PIP next Wednesday and then JIE the following Wednesday. The other thing to say there is that I've been working closely with Jane and also Lisa, the two new transformation directors, on handover and induction. And I know Jane is on the meeting tonight, and more than happy for Jane to come in on any of my updates. And Jane will be delivering this update next month. So please feel free to come in, Jane, if you want to, as we go through this. Thanks, Paul. So if we could just go on to the day one assurance, please.
Sorry, Adam has raised his hand. Do you have a question on what's been said thus far, Adam, or something else?
No, a question on what's been said thus far.
Okay.
Chairman. It's just to ask about the new social care record system that Paul's mentioned. I know from both stories in the national press about IT transitions and my professional experience in terms of migrating from one platform to another, that it can be a process that's fraught with difficulties. May I just ask what safeguards and what training is going to be in place to ensure that process is as seamless as possible?
Well, Anna's sat next to me, so I'll just start, but I'll hand over to Anna. I think one of the things that we did right from the start to mitigate that was that we're not changing supplier. So we're moving systems. So it's the supplier's old system to the supplier's new system, and that mitigates a lot of the issues you get around data migration. So that was one of the steps that provides some level of reassurance. And of course, we've been working on this for the past 12 months now, and one of the reasons we want it to go live well before vesting day is for some of those reasons, that we can embed it and stabilise it. But in terms of detail, I'll hand over to Anna, as Anna's very close to that and watching it very carefully.
Yeah, I too have had that sort of experience, particularly with social care systems in the past. So all I can say is we have been very, very robust in the planning, testing. The teams have been very, very actively involved in that. We've been very careful with the planning of things like training and how we do that, as well as everything else going on, and the timing of that training and how we'll roll it out. So we're confident. We did move the date to 7th of December go live from November, but that was to allow a slower rollout of training given COVID, and that we were doing more virtual classes and things like that. So I have a almost weekly check-in with the team, who are confident on the 7th of December go live. The other thing that we've done is taken very pragmatic decisions about data migration. Normally where these things start to fall over is when people talk about taking years and years of records. And as Paul says, we have the fallback position where our old system will remain live as an archive solution and a storage solution. So we're not having to move everything at the same time, and that also gives us some further reassurance that everything will be okay for day one.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, Paul, do you want to move on?
Yeah, thank you. So just moving on, Paul, on the slides to day one assurance, please. And I'll just point out a couple of things here. So this slide is really about those products that we have to deliver across the programme at a unitary level. So they're applicable to the north and the west equally. And there are a few watch points that we've got there. So bearing in mind that this report is about a month old now, I'll fill in some of the gaps in terms of what we've done to mitigate it. So in terms of the blue, there's nothing that should have started that hasn't started. So that's all in train where it needs to be. We've got a red, which is of concern, which is really about the splitting or how we manage the splitting of where we're unable to split NCC systems safely for day one. And one of the backups there is to have the right kind of data protection protocols in place and all the legal aspects of that. So once we'd identified that we needed to do something around this to get some traction and accelerate it, what we've done since then is that we've engaged a legal specialist to work closely with us on that has experience of doing this kind of thing before. What they're working on now, a data sharing agreement is being drafted, and that'll be ready by the end of this week. And then they're also drafting a schedule, which is like a template, which will need to be completed by each of the services that have systems that either will split or we can't split, and we have to have the data sharing agreement in place. So what they'll be doing is working with us to mitigate that and going through all that for each of the service areas with those systems. And there are quite a number of systems that fall into this category. Also, we've recruited an interim information governance project manager, a specialist project manager, and they start next week. And what they'll be doing is then working with the services to complete those schedules with the legal expertise that we've brought in, so that by the end of November, we expect to have all that in place. So that's what we've been doing to mitigate that area of concern, and that's the only real area of concern we've got that's a red status. The next ones are it's an amber status, so where we're keeping an increased watch, and we might need to do some things to make sure that we either bring them back on track, or there's a little bit of slippage and we need to do something a little bit different to accelerate things. So one is the TUPE transfer process, and we're working closely with our colleagues in HR and obviously talking to the trade unions about that and making sure that we've got a mechanism for engaging with those services and staff in NCC where they're going to be splitting and where the biggest impact will be for those staff. The other one is lead authority and hosted service agreements. So where a service is being hosted, there'll need to be an agreement in place. So if it's being hosted in the west, there'll need to be a service level agreement for the north. So we want to make sure there's a robust process for generating really good service level agreements for those and have those in place and fully agreed. So we've set up a mechanism to address that, which is we're keeping a close watch on to make sure there's no slippage. It is one of those things that can get pushed out and left, but it's a mistake to do that. We need to have those early conversations, and obviously where there's political input to some of those things, then we will engage with relevant members.
Will we not actually need a section 113 agreement between west and north and west?
Potentially, and that's where we're taking some of the advice to be able to do that. But there'll be individual service schedules as well that are around the specifics of what the actual service level will be, and things that need to be in place around what we'll do if those service standards are not being met, and dispute resolution and those kind of things. So we'll aim to create a boilerplate of those that are consistent across all those lead and hosted authority ones, and then put in the service-specific standards around each of those, without making an industry of it, but making sure they're robust. And the other one is novation, contract novation, although it's slightly less complicated than novation, given that the structural change order allows for contract transfer. So we're making sure that that's a neat process and making sure that suppliers are fully informed, but suppliers don't have an option to opt out like they would do in a normal transfer. So we're just keeping a brief on that. So what we've done in terms of addressing those things, we're engaging closely with the programmes. We're working through a very simple approach now to do that and coordinate it centrally, not relying on services to do too much around that, but obviously where there needs to be contact with a service, then we'll be really clear about that. And a lot of the big ones around this where there can be complications are around adults, and when we start to tell people that something's changing, then residents can get anxious about what that means. So making sure that we've got the right resources available to deal with those inquiries and make sure it's managed effectively and calmly. So we're keeping a close watching brief on those. Thanks, Paul. If you just go over to the next slide, please. And this is the report that you'll be seeing around service readiness. So those things that have to happen in individual services. So same categories, and there's nothing to report in any of these services at the moment. So there's nothing that should have started that hasn't started. There's nothing causing concern that we can't manage at the moment, and nothing that needs to be on an increased watch at this point. That can change at any time, and the mechanisms are in place in the programme to follow those through, to have really close oversight of those things and to be able to report them, but also more importantly to mitigate them, usually before we've had to report them. So those things are all in place, and that's where you'll start to see this kind of report coming through to the new governance arrangements that are being rolled out in November as well. So there'll be a really clear report around West and what West has to do, but also, as I say, making sure we keep real close central oversight on those things that have to be delivered centrally. Just in terms, I won't go through all these because I know the agenda's quite full, but I'll just pick out a few points in the change management update. So we've really good engagement with chief execs and senior managers around how we get the resources and change champions in place and plug in some of those gaps. And you'll see on some of the numbers that we're starting to get there with that now. We've been doing informal walk rounds wherever it's been safe to do that, and just gauging the temperature checks with talking to colleagues, staff and so on, their understanding and those kinds of things, just to gauge where people are at in the journey we're on and what we can do to support people better. In terms of change champions, we've seen really good increase in Northampton Borough Council with 9 recruited in September, and we'll be able to report more of that in October as well when the next set comes out. And there's been an increase of 7 in NCC as well. And as you move over to the next slide, you see how that SNC, South Northants, have got no gaps now in any of the services, which is really good. And big thanks to Richard and the team there for promoting these roles and making sure we've got that. And Daventry, we started to close the gap there as well. And overall, we're only about 10 short, 12 short if you include NCC in that as well. So that's making good progress. Just in terms of next steps and what's coming, so we've produced a support pack for managers to help managers who, when they're having discussions with their teams and individuals through the TUPE process and so on, and working through what that looks like for a proposal for how we support employees as well. We're also really into implementation of Microsoft 365 as well. That's been rolled out in Daventry. The learning from Daventry has been used in the subsequent rollouts, and we'll be rolling more out in November as well, so that those will all be in place well before Christmas in terms of the replacement of the email system. We've done a number of live Q&As. Teresa Grant did one with NCC staff last week as well, which was well attended. And we're working with chief execs and programme people as well, and programme leads to do Q&A sessions, and also around videos as well, because it's difficult to get people into the engine room under the current circumstances. So we're looking at how we could do a virtual engine room and some of those videos that can be used to explain things to people and bring things to life, where we'd much prefer to be in a room with people, but we just can't at the moment. So there's a number of those videos being produced that explain different parts and different bits of the programme as well. We'll also be proposing in next month a change freeze that will come in over a phased period, which means that we have to start locking things down and that we can't change things without full sign-off as to the impact of what any changes will be as we get into the final stages of implementation. So that change freeze will come through for sign-off next month. We'll be starting to implement that across different phases. So December and January, we'll have to see different elements of that come into place as we get closer to vesting day. I think just moving on to the comms and engagement update, there's a number of briefing sessions being done and run. We've been dealing with the feedback from the logo surveys and so on. What we're really turning our mind to now is, as you mentioned, Chair, Christmas and post-Christmas. So that 100 days to go approach, where we really need to start stepping up there, and we'd be much more resident focused in our comms and engagements in those 100 days up to vesting day. And in some cases, it's just about reassuring residents as what won't change as much as what will change. So making sure that we've got the programme organised and the resources around those final 100 days and how we organise ourselves for the internal comms, and start to switch our attention to communication with residents so that they're prepared for vesting day as well. And how we think about how we use the wider comms resources across all 8 councils as we start to wind down the activities of the existing organisations and turn thoughts to the future as well, and how we bring those resources together, manage what we have to do in the legacy organisations, and start to focus more of those resources onto that. I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover, and I'm just hoping that through the chair that Audra's on the line and that Audra can pick up on the finance part of the director's update. Chair, thank you. She's not on.
No, she is.
Okay. I can cover it.
Do we have Martin? Well, hang on, before we move on to finance, shall we, are there any questions on anything that Paul has covered thus far?
Chair, could I just add something?
Crack on.
Just to mention in Paul's update on the Children's Trust, and we're due to go live on Monday, the 2nd of November. Today we received approval from Minister Vicky Ford to proceed with establishment of the Children's Trust. So ministerial approval, and now they will draft a new order that will be laid and ready for Monday. So just an update for those that may not have heard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can we circulate that letter that sent to Cabinet colleagues?
Certainly can. Yes, if I send
I'll
it to you,
do that.
Chair, are you happy to circulate?
I got my own copy. The minister copied myself and Russell in. So
indeed. So very happy for you to share that, Chair.
Okay, fine. I'm never sure with these what we can share, what we can't. So yeah, I'll send that round. And colleagues, and it's probably a good point that you mentioned that, to thank all those who got us to this point on the Children's Trust. It's certainly a massive milestone that we will pass on Sunday, Monday, however you wish to define it. And I certainly wish to put on record my thanks and that of all of the executive to all those who've done the heavy lifting to get us to this point. My involvement was pretty easy. I just got a letter from the minister and said, job done, so move on.
I certainly pass your thanks on to the team. I know they'll really appreciate that.
Thank you. So any other questions to Paul? The day one readiness, Paul, is very interesting. So if we were to speak to any member of the staff, are we currently saying now 5 months out that everybody knows the who, what, why, where and when of what they're doing on the 1st of April?
No, definitely not, Chair. I think it'd be fair to say that there are things, around opinions on what people's level of understanding is, which we're working through. partly through frequently asked questions, but also engaging with senior managers as we work through the process. And you know, we've dealt with this over a difficult period when we've not been able to have the full engagement with everybody as we'd hoped to do, and we know we had to prioritise COVID and leave people to get on with doing those things as well. So it is fair to say that there is more work to do with services to ensure that they are prepared and ready for day one, and that's what we're focusing on as well.
Okay, great. So that would be Jane's task coming in. So we move on to the finance part. You said Audra's not on the call. Do you want to do it, or just nominate someone else quickly?
It's quite easy to do, Chair. There's nothing significant to report, so I'm happy to cover it in a couple of sentences, if that's okay.
Yeah, crack on.
So in terms of programme expenditure, we're reporting a forecast to be on track at 22.6 million. In terms of benefits realisation, there's been a slight improvement since the last period by 52k. And we're obviously about to report the next period as we go into November. And we've just gone through, as part of the handover, we've gone through a deep dive on the programme finances, and Audra's pulling that report together. But in terms of this report, there's no significant variances to appraise members of. We're not asking for any more money at this stage, and don't anticipate having to ask for any more money. We know there's been some slippage around benefits realisation, slight improvement this month. And in terms of that overall 85 million target, just to remind members again that almost 35 million of that was delivered last year, 14 is on track to be delivered this year, and the 35 million pounds remaining, notwithstanding the financial planning and budget setting process and what that means as we work through various things that are outstanding there, including settlements and so on, and the impact of COVID. So we are keeping a close watch on the benefits realisation and trying to pull back. All those things that haven't been delivered around benefits realisation related to COVID has been mitigated in different ways. So that's all in progress. Not being a 151 officer, I'm hoping there's no real technical questions, but we can certainly get answers if there are any more technical questions. Chair, thank you.
I'm sure if you breach some rule, Martin would quickly jump in, and he looks happy. So are we done on that item? Yeah. So just before we move on then to item 7, this is Paul's last meeting of the executive. Can I thank you, Paul, on behalf of all of the executive for everything that you've done thus far to get us to this point. I think it would be fair to say that we wouldn't have actually got to this point as neat and tidy as we have done without your effort and that of all of the team. I wish you every success for probably a less hectic life going forward, but thank you for what you've done, and we wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just say thank you to everybody. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, and it's something, a part of my life that I'll look back on with immense pride, and I'll be watching very closely. You land it on day one, but also go on to make West Northamptonshire the best performing local authority in the country, as per the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Certainly my ambition as well. So item 7, consultation on local council tax reduction scheme. Rebecca, do you want to introduce this, or just let Martin do it?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a report to the executive outlining the consultation process for a new council tax reduction scheme for the whole of West Northamptonshire that will harmonise the rates charged by the 3 authorities at present. Just for your for wider dissemination, council tax reduction scheme is a means-tested benefit payable to working age households, which reduces the council tax due. The lowest income pensioner households benefit from a scheme by statute, and we don't have any control over. The Council Tax Reduction Task and Finish Group examined various options and were at all times mindful of the effect both on the budget of the council and on the budgets of our most vulnerable individuals when we changed the scheme. The report details the existing 3 schemes as charged at present across the West, and the proposal that the Task and Finish Group have come up with. And at this stage, it is just a proposal and is subject to the results of the consultation process. Also proposed for consultation are the harmonisation of 5 other policies that vary across the West. The point of this harmonisation is to bring them into line with changes made by the Department of Work and Pension over the last 7 years. They're fairly minor changes. The report covers the proposal, the consultation proposals, where we're going to advertise the consultation, where we're going to make it widely available, and sets out the timetable. And I think if there are any further questions, I'm happy to answer them, as will Martin, if there's any more technical questions. Thank you, Chair.
Adam?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to thank Councillor Breeze for her report, and I'd also like to praise the proposed format of the consultation. I think it's great to see that we will be taking a targeted approach, liaising with the voluntary sector, with money and debt advice services and other interested parties who should be able to give us some very, very valuable qualitative feedback on this issue, which is an extremely important issue, especially during these worsening economic times. So I would hope that we'll consider the results of that consultation very carefully and come up with the fairest proposals possible. But very, very happy to commend Councillor Breeze's work thus far.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think it's, well, we're consulting with the people who are closest to those that we're trying to target. Lizzie?
Yes, again, thank you, Rebecca, for your detailed work on this area. Just on page 36, section 3.2.5, it says there are around 21,277 residents that receive council tax reduction at the moment. And out of West Northampton, that equates to about 5.25% of the population. So the first question is, how does that compare with the national norm elsewhere in the UK? And secondly, the minimum contribution by customer for South Northampton is 8.5%. How many people are we actually talking about for South Northampton at the moment? Obviously, that will change, bearing in mind we're in the middle of COVID and people will, have difficulties and hardship, etc. You might not be able to provide both those stats now, but just out of interest, if you have that information now, or whether you need to go and find it.
Thank you for that question. I don't have the information to hand on the national comparison, but I will find it and get it to you. In terms of South Northamptonshire, at the beginning, when we began this process, there were approximately 1,900 households who were in receipt of council tax reduction scheme. I believe that figure has changed a little, and if you'd like the detail on the most up-to-date figures, I will have to get that and come back to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, my apologies. I had noticed that Peter Rawlinson wanted to speak on this article, and I'd rather do that before Cabinet start debating things, so whatever points you wish to make, we could at least consider instead of taking a minute at the end. So sorry, Peter. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity to comment on this consultation. I realise it's only a consultation at this moment, and I am all too aware of the needs to balance the council's books and that there must be equality across the new area. And I also understand that creating a differential between the current areas could have legal problems. However, I believe that we are now in a situation where there is a difference between equality and fairness. In South Northamptonshire, as we've heard, the current rate is only 8.5%. And the results of the proposed consultation could see their payments triple. At the same time, interest increases in council tax as a result of the unitarisation will see their bills increase slightly more than would be the case if the status quo continued as a result of the full council tax harmonisation. And like me, I'm sure we've all seen an increase in the number of people contacting their local councillors for help with economic issues caused by the COVID pandemic. Now, whilst in general, South Northamptonshire is not a deprived area, if you look at the 2009 indices of deprivation, over half the areas in South Northamptonshire have some form of deprivation, being in the lower half of the national deprivation indices, and some are rated in the lowest decile in the country. I'm not sure that the costs of collecting an increased percentage of council tax and the subsequent write-offs will actually result in a higher take overall. And 8.5% of something is more than 26.5% of nothing. I also feel the concept of cost neutrality that is mentioned could be slightly misleading. Now, in South Northamptonshire, we've always contra-accounted the cost of the scheme against additional revenue from second homes, empty properties, that sort of thing. And in a financially secure council, this works as a means of redistribution. However, there is not necessarily any legal link between the revenue streams and the costs of the council tax reduction scheme. Each is a separate choice that the council will have to make. So we could end up in the situation where the most vulnerable in South Northamptonshire are expected to pay more council tax and required to pay a higher percentage of that. Now, I'm sure some see South Northamptonshire as a cash cow, but I do feel that it is unfair that there is a larger attack on those who are already struggling in South Northamptonshire. And I would like to see some form of phased approach that would limit the rises for those people to something that is slightly more realistic. And I hope you will consider that as part of your discussions. Thank you very much for that, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. A couple of points in reply that I certainly know some of the answers to on that. Well, firstly, can you please put all of those very good points well made to the consultation so they can be actually formally considered as well? We have already asked MHCLG about the regulations and about whether or not it's possible to phase them in. As they currently stand, the regulations say something like it has to be done, they have to be harmonised in 1 year unless there's a good reason not to. And what a good reason not to is not all that clear. We don't believe we have at the moment a good reason not to that might satisfy that definition. And I think that was certainly advice I had from Martin the last time I spoke with him. But MHCLG have said they will look at it and come back. So I agree with all the points you make. I also pushed very hard to get data on collection rates, but there wasn't really anything discernible in the data that said that at any rate, if you took the sort of 3 points that we had, 31 at the highest, 20 in the sort of middle and 8.5 at the bottom, there was no pattern that said one equaled a lower collection rate to the other. They were all broadly similar. So it's difficult to sustain that argument with data, but it certainly has been looked at, and certainly one that I'm very aware of. Personally, I would always try and get the rate as low as we could possibly afford. But also, one thing to be very clear on is, but we do expect it to be paid, as opposed to sending out a bill, which I think is your concern as well as mine, where both sides of the transaction don't actually believe there is any realistic prospect that the bill will be paid, because it may not be possible because the people just are not in a position to do so. So I think that's where we need to be coming from. Rebecca wants to come back in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you, Councillor Rawlins. I think your points are absolutely spot on. And just to reassure you that the Task and Finish group were very well aware of it, Belinda Green, one of the officers at South Northampton, provided various case studies to illustrate the point and the difference that the 8.5 to 20 and the 31% made in the budgets. And so for our lowest income households, it can be a couple of £100 a year, £700 a year difference, versus increasing council tax across the population, where we're concerned about £40 to £50 on households who are better able to afford it. So we are so well aware of that, and hence our pushing MHCLG to introduce some element of fairness across the scheme. And depending on the response from MHCLG, how we take it further, there are various ideas floating around, which may be expanded upon later. But thank you. Please make those points.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this? I see Belinda has been mentioned by Rebecca, but I know her and the teams in Daventry, the Borough, South Northamptonshire have worked on this. I've done a lot of work. So again, Belinda, I thank you for what you've done, but can you also thank all of the people on the ground, because I know there was a lot of data requested and asked for and requested for more data and so on and so forth. It was a bit of an industry, but thank you, and thank you to Rebecca and the team for getting us to this point. And hopefully when we get a consultation, we can then feed that into the budget setting process.
Thank you.
So we move on to item 8, Health and Wellbeing Board recommendation. Is this from Lucy or?
It's me, Chair Anna.
You, Chair Anna.
Thank you. So you've got the paper in front of you, and I'm pleased to introduce these reports and ask the executive to endorse a recommendation to establish 2 health and wellbeing boards to serve one in the west and one in the north, in order to meet the statutory duties to deliver place-based wellbeing and tackle inequalities. I won't go through the report in detail, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but members will note that this recommendation seeks 2 boards where previously we have sought 1, for example, for safeguarding. I just wanted to just touch on that before sort of asking for questions. This recommendation recognises that there is a very, very different nature and need of the populations in the 2 new unitaries, and tries to reflect that. And the background part of the paper sets out the duties that the board will need to work towards, and particularly as well things like integration with health and local population health needs. And it's worth noting, if members didn't know it, that all health organisations have now also been asked to identify a place-based lead as part of their integrated care systems. The idea of 2 absolutely supports our continuing progress on local hubs, working very closely with health and GPs and local organisations, including the voluntary sector, and will make sure that we can link into the existing health and wellbeing forums that exist already in the district and boroughs. We'd also like to make sure that these services that health funds already under the Better Care Fund arrangements can also be linked into this, in terms of how we make sure that what the funding we use and any resources we share and any plans we create with health actually deliver local outcomes for local people. So in conclusion, that we believe that it's best that this is a separate board and not one for the county, and that will allow us to better reflect local need, local priorities, and also for members of the board to hold health partners and local delivery to account. So I'm happy to take any questions, but hopefully a fairly self-explanatory paper, Chair.
Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just want to support the recommendation, and as Anna mentioned, it goes back to our principles of two where we can, and 1 if there's a good reason why we can't provide 2. So first of all, it ticks that box, and I think it is the right place, and it's a challenge back to us to make sure that Health and Wellbeing Board works. Because when I've asked the question previously about how do we make or hold to account the sort of health system and that integration that Anna mentioned, it is through the Health and Wellbeing Board. So we've got a big challenge ahead of us to hold that Health and Wellbeing Board and that system to account, especially with all that brilliant work around the local hubs and the health integration. It is really a crucial element that we need to get some good people on and really hold that system to account, particularly when we know in the past And it's no criticism of health partners, but that system, when it has been stretched, sometimes it's not fallen apart, but it starts to fray around the edges around the relationships. And I know there's some brilliant work that has gone in over the last couple of years, mainly led, I have to say, by Anna, that we've made a lot of progress. So we've got to make sure we do hold that board to account to get those outcomes for our communities and residents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So if there's nothing else, I will move the recommendation.
Just got one point.
Sorry, who was that? Richard?
Yes, please.
Sorry, Richard, crack on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just really with regard to the health and wellbeing forums, I was part of that for about 18 months in Daventry, and it worked very well. It very much suits our philosophy of place, in that, we are as close to the delivery of those services as possible. And it's just ensuring that that relationship between the board and the forums is a real one and an intimate one whereby stuff can come either way, pass either way, any intelligence, data, policies, etc. To making sure that we are delivering exactly what is wanted in the areas, because all of our areas will differ in the West. We need to ensure we are aware of those nuances and stuff in what services we provide and where we provide them.
Thank you. I think it's important that they actually have a real purpose and a real outcomes instead of just being talking shops, which I think has been the danger of, as some people have said to me in the past. I had that feel with them. So I will move that we adopt the recommendation to have two or a West board and a North board, but that'll be for them, but we will have two boards. So are we agreed on that?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Can we just skip back to item 6, because I'm acutely aware I didn't actually move the recommendation to formally do that consultation. And before Paul Hanson sends me an email telling me off for doing that, apologies, Paul. So can I formally move that we note the report and launch the consultation for the council tax reduction scheme as set out? We agreed? Thank you. And I think despite all of those comments that we've had about that one, it's probably also important to point out that there will be more people under this scheme paying less than are currently paying at the moment. So I think much as we've all got the concerns about those paying more, overall, I think more people will be paying less. So I will move now to item 8, the Health and Wellbeing Board.
No, that's all just done, Chair.
Sorry, item 9, the COVID response operating model.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And again, hopefully a relatively simple paper in terms of the recommendation made. Members will remember that we took as part of the blueprint design for the unitaries a recommendation previously that public health should be largely disaggregated into 2 teams, one for the north and one for the west, with the exception of the DPH, which sit across both, and some key parts of the team around intelligence that work very closely with health. And the same is true of our emergency planning service, which we also plan to disaggregate. However, it's quite clear as COVID continues and as we move into the second wave of the pressures that causes, that the public health team and emergency planning team are obviously under immense pressure in terms of helping and supporting environmental health officers and working with them to make sure that we're responding according to the COVID outbreaks and that we're managing and mitigating wherever possible the spread of the disease. With that in mind, and with the likely disruption that disaggregation will cause, we're asking members to accept a recommendation that we move to a hosted model for all of public services and emergency planning, but only for a year period or less if we actually come out of the COVID situation earlier than that, and in order to make sure that we don't have any disruption in the focus on COVID and in the support that those teams are providing across the county. So I think it's a fairly, again, self-explanatory request to adopt this and then make sure, as I said, that we will still disaggregate at a later date in line with the original plans. So we're just seeking formal agreement that we hold that team together during this process and until we get to that safe place. Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
Chair again. Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. Really, it's important that we have a continuity. This isn't the time to start that particular group. And we can see from all the discussions we've had that really difficult decisions are going to be made. And the last thing we want to do is be involved in some sort of transformation and disaggregation in the middle of it all. So, a very sensible solution, Chair, and I certainly support.
Yeah, I think this fits in with Matt's earlier plea to have two of everything, unless there's a good reason not to. And I certainly think there's a very good reason at the moment quite not to split our emergency and public health response in the middle of the biggest public health crisis that we've had for many generations. So, and let's come back to it, hopefully in a year's time when everything's out of the way. But also, I suspect there will be a lot of lessons to be learned, which may feed into a new and improved public health response. I see Lucy certainly nodding in agreement with that. It seems to me that public health in general will probably end up getting a bit of a shake-up after we get back to post-COVID normality, and we may as well do it once. Have a new fit-for-purpose West Northants public health and response and emergency planning response, which has picked up all of these things, both council, local government reform and wider COVID lessons to be learned for future generations.
Ian, I think I agree with you, but I also say that the further we get away from a massive crisis, the more complacent we get. Always with emergency planning, it all seems to suffer. But certainly in the short term, medium term, I think you're right, we'll probably end up with a really good, effective, learn all the lessons, get something up and running that is fit for purpose. And then over the decades, as long as nothing happens, I'm sure it will probably dwindle again. But in the meantime, let's get something up and running that's really good.
You're a cynic, Richard. Is anyone else wishing to speak? I don't see any hands, physical or virtual. So I will move the recommendation then that we, I'm just trying to recommend, the shadow endorses the recommendation to adopt a hosted model for public health and emergency planning for a 1 year period and for a wider review of disaggregation and resource requirements to take place during 21-22. Are we agreed? Thank you. That is carried. So item 10, West Northants opening hours. Are we happy with 9 to 5? Agreed.
Sorry, can I just say, I've sort of held my peace on this and probably shouldn't have done. I know 9 to 5 is, but I just wondered why we always default to that. Is there some sort of operational or valid reason why we always end up 9-5 weekends off? And I've always found that difficult in the police, with support staff, with the hospitals, with all their support staff. We always seem to default to that. And are we just defaulting to it, or is there some real good rationale behind the 9-5 proposal? I'll be just
Lizzie
yeah,
wants to come in as well.
Yeah, my hand was raised as well, and I was just about to say the same thing, Richard. I would say for the time being, a 9 to 5 is probably a sensible option, but I would like to see in the long term a more flexible working approach where, it's an 8 to 8 type situation. Not that I would expect staff to work 8 to 8, but you were on a rota, and you operated as per many other call centres and customer service centres, which was more flexible and more needs based.
I think we're not saying the calls won't be manned beyond 9 to 5. I think it's the physical presence in the buildings, isn't it? Richard Ellis. Let's bring Richard Ellis in here. Put us all right.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, well, you cut me off at the knees in terms of my intro. So obviously, members have had the opportunity to read the report. I think in answer to the question, Lizzie and Richard, I mean, clearly this is for customer service opening hours for the telephone and for face-to-face. Part of the strategic intent is very much moving and shifting in line with consumer trends, shifting customer services online as far as possible so that people are able to self-serve. Obviously, as part of this exercise, back in June, we agreed in principle to harmonise the opening hours across the unitary areas, but that was on pending a consultation with our customers, and obviously we've conducted that consultation, and also alongside that, really looked at the call demands across the week and the sort of profile of customer access. And that came out very strongly in favour of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Opening hours. So that was how we got to that sort of conclusion, very much on the basis of the consultation feedback and just looking at our call demand. Now, Katie Jones.
Richard, can I just come back to you on that? But surely that would have been your results, because that's what you currently deliver.
Yes, yes. That's what was asked.
Your data would say that. The issue is about, is it an issue with the unions and working weekends? Is it because most people have their weekends off, and logically that's when we should be open? So I'm just wondering whether the data was skewed because that's what we currently do, or am I not right on that?
So as part of this process, we've obviously also consulted with staff affected by this and the trade unions. But I'm going to bring in Katie Jones, who has done the heavy lifting on this and obviously understands the detail of the sort of questions that we asked in that consultation.
Thanks very much, Richard. Good evening, everybody. I think the key to start off with was when we agreed to look at harmonisation. It was about getting a safe and legal harmonisation for day one across the line. So it was about the least disruption with regards to employees and to the services that we've currently got. And it's really sort of like a phase one. So it unified us all in the West for day one. And then it gives us the opportunity then to start looking at how, as we develop our services and we start delivering the end-to-end service provision in a digital way and in a better way, and looking at the hubs and how we need to align where we do provide our services, because at the moment they're provided in a council office. That might not be the best place going forward. It might be better off at libraries, for instance, or the expansion of the adult hubs. Then that's when we'll be really able to start delivering the strategy, the customer experience strategy that we've delivered. So it's based on what we can do now with the limited time that we've got and the limited disruption. But knowing that, we've got the strategy and we then can start working on this going forward once we become West Northants.
Chair, I think that really satisfies me that sounds logical, and I would accept that, but it's obviously something to be developed as we mature as a council. So thank you both for your responses.
Thank you, Richard. Phil?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that with that response, because I did agree with what Lizzie and Richard were saying, so I'm happy with that. I just wanted to check that there's nothing that will cause problems for our partners with regard to building opening hours. I'm mindful of the fact that the police operate in some council offices, as do people like community law and things like that. I take it that there's no problems with them still operating as they do, and we're not having any problems in there for them.
No, I mean, there's lots of co-located services across the different local authorities within the West, and we have discussed that with them and also the customer services teams. So at the moment, there's lots of different opening hours. So customer services may finish providing face-to-face at 5 o'clock in certain locations, but then the Job Centre Plus may be open later or earlier. So that's more of a facilities management that we've already identified who those partners are, and we'll start more consultation with them going forward, but it shouldn't affect them at all.
But again, I think we just need to stress here, the physical opening hours of the building or buildings, and the time that telephones might be open can be different and probably should be different. I certainly know at St. Northants there's been an evening team working for many years. This time of night that you can ring them and they can ring you to chase up any arrears and sort out any council tax queries, and you see the difference in the collection rates. And when those methods were applied when we worked with Cherwell, again you saw a marked increase in their collection rate simply because it was convenient for both sides. So I hope we do actually we need to make it convenient for people and not just say phone up to be told go to the website, to be told phone up. If you're BT, that's usually what I find happens. So I don't see any blue hands. I don't see anybody else waving. So I will move that we, where are we? Recommend the Shadow Executive approve the West Northants Customer Services opening hours from vesting day to become 9 to 5. Are we agreed? Thank you. That is agreed. Item 11, Assets, Capital Schemes and Reserves Notification Update Report. George.
Thank you, Chair. So this, as we know, members, is a standing agenda item to enable the existing sovereign councils to bring any schemes through that fall within this process. So you'll see attached at Appendix 1 a paper that was taken to Northampton Borough Council's council meeting back in September. By way of summary, the housing revenue account is a ring-fenced account that represents ultimately the costs of holding the Borough Council's housing stock. And this particular paper sought approval in September for an additional £50 million of housing revenue account, or HRA as it's abbreviated to, capital programme expenditure funded through borrowing. So for awareness, when the council approves the budget envelope, it is merely approval in principle that then enables the council to receive schemes and approve them as and when they come through. So these might be, for example, to acquire and develop homes to add to the future West Northants council stock, reducing the housing waiting list, or providing homes for those in more expensive temporary accommodation, which, as members will know, is a growing pressure of several million to the general fund. It also enables stock rotation to release larger homes that are under-occupied, and also, certainly as we move forward into the new West Northants Council, the development of specialist homes and supported living to support the wider social care requirements. So each scheme, just for clarity, is required to have its own robust business case to demonstrate due diligence and value for money, and has to be approved by Cabinet at Northampton Borough Council. However, there is a need to obtain the approval, hence the paper going to Council back in September, which was approved at that particular meeting. So the recommendations are within the report, Chair. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to add to what George has said there, we do have in Northampton massive opportunities, massive challenges, and these will be carried forward into the unitary. One of those is that we have 3,500 people on the housing waiting list, and in common with many towns and cities, the cost of temporary accommodation is rising enormously despite government support for homelessness and the great activities that our officers are doing to address homelessness. So I think this is consistent with the bold ambitions we talk about for the West as well. Many of you know that Northampton Partnership Homes has been around for a few years now, managing our housing stock as an arm's length management organisation. The council retains the ownership, they provide the management. And prior to their arrival, I think I'm right in saying this council had built 8 homes in 12 years. Well, since they've been on the scene, we've built around about 150 plus completed and now moving forward to be occupied, in addition to which there are between 400 and 500 homes that are now on site for construction or are finishing off the contracting stage to get started, or indeed just finishing the planning stage. As George says, the housing revenue account is if you like, ring-fenced money. It is tenants' money, and it is used for the maintenance and the building of new homes. And so this borrowing is to be funded by that, and therefore has no direct impact on the general fund. However, what impact there is on the general fund hopefully comes through further savings that can be created, such as the 3 or 4 projects that are now moving ahead with both the County Council and NHS involvement around that sort of agenda. Use of the money will be on continuing all sorts of imaginative things. We have recently been buying back council houses, ex-council houses that come on the market. We are also funding existing developments in better ways. Developing land is quite significant, including things like the garage sites you see on council estates that are no longer used. These are seeing development, and also acquiring further blocks. In the last probably few months, certainly the last year, we have bought or acquired Riverside House, which you may know on the Bedford Road, which will lead 60 units for housing. Beaumont House on the Billing Road, which will create 60 units aimed at temporary accommodation, rough sleeper rehousing. Belgrave House above the Grosvenor Centre, 120 key worker opportunities. And Barclay House, the large, horrible development, historic development you'll see next to Seoul Central. All these things are underway, but to continue with that ambition and to ensure that the new unitary is not saddled with the cost of temporary accommodation and this housing deficit, we have chosen to approve this, and we're very excited about what it'll bring. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, question for Jonathan. You said something about that it wouldn't have an impact on the finances, yet it is borrowed money, or am I'm not obviously an expert in this area. So are we borrowing money from the market or from elsewhere, and is that debt then taken over by the West Northamptonshire, or is it some other form of borrowing?
I think because you're borrowing against your rental stream,
yeah,
it's kind of ring fenced. So the rental money isn't actually, I don't think, legally viewed as council money, so to speak. It has to be kept in the housing revenue account. So you borrow against the HRA account. I'm sure Martin will tell me if I'm completely wrong on that, but I think so. So in that respect, it doesn't impact on the ability for the council to borrow for its investment programme.
Correct.
It's the reason that you have an HRA account.
Yeah. So where's the money's coming from? The income we got from rents. We're borrowing from ourselves. Is that right?
Yeah, fundamentally, there is borrowing. I think it's public works loan borrowing, but it's all funded and repaid through the rental streams, which are only allowed to be spent on that specifically. And although I say there's no negative impact on the general fund, we, in these last few years, have suffered significantly on our general fund with the cost of temporary accommodation, spiralling out. So there is a positive potential, but no, it is ring-fenced in that respect.
And I understand the reason for the borrowing. I obviously agree with it because it is important. How we have the same issues in Daventry. But yeah, thank you for that explanation. Thank you, Jeff.
Martin, do you want to add anything?
Absolutely right. That was what was just mentioned then. Funded through PWLB, that's where the borrowing will come from. The charge for that borrowing, when those business cases come forward, will be charged into the HRA, and the HRA is funded through the tenants. So in terms of the response that you've had, that's absolutely accurate.
But we're also, well, you're only really agreeing your overdraft limit. You're not actually agreeing to draw any of it down at this point, are you?
Each, as George said, each individual development has to stack up with a strong business case and get an individual approval. Yeah.
But it gives you that flexibility and nimbleness that you probably need to move if an opportunity comes along. Particularly up against people who can put their hand in their pocket and know they have funding available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, any other comments? I think all we're being asked to do on this one is to note the report. So we endorse the, executive endorses the proposal set out in Appendix 1 under the notification process. So are we agreed? Thank you. Okay, so item 12, matters from the Shadow Authority. There are none. Item 13, any exempt items, we have none of those, and there have been no urgent items that have been notified. So we are at the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your meeting, particularly executive colleagues. As I said, we've been at this since 4 o'clock with sort of literally 3 back-to-back meetings, and I think Richard and Adam are going on to another Daventry meeting very soon as well. So thank you all, and thank you as well for not just cabinet colleagues but officers as well have been supporting us in that. At some point we need to schedule in something to eat. So I wish you all what's left of the evening, and I'm sure we'll all see each other very shortly.